My name is Julius Hayes, and I am 72 years old. At my age, you learn that true evil doesn't announce itself with thunder and lightning. It arrives with a smile and a warm bowl of soup served by the person you love most in this world. My daughter Chloe, my only child, thought my old eyes couldn't see her reflection in the polished glass of the kitchen cabinet. She thought I didn't notice the fine white powder that fell from her trembling fingers and vanished into the rich dark gumbo, the bowl that was meant for me. In the split second she turned her back, I made a simple choice. I switched our plates. What I saw in the next hour would unravel a betrayal so cold it would make a viper seem like a saint. Before I continue my story, please let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And be sure to like and subscribe if you believe that sometimes the quietest people have to make the loudest moves. The silence in my kitchen used to be a comfortable thing. It was the easy quiet that exists between two people who know each other's souls. Me and my wife Diane could sit here for hours at this old oak table, she reading a book, me looking over blueprints. That silence was a symphony. But ever since she passed a year ago, the silence has become a heavy, unwelcome guest. Today, it was suffocating. Chloe set the bowl of white porcelain down in front of me. The rich smell of shrimp and dual sausage and okra instantly transported me back to 1,000 other Sundays when Diane would be at the stove humming an old Etta James tune. This recipe was her legacy, and now I knew it had been poisoned. "Thank you, honey," I said, my voice steady, a skill I'd perfected over 40 years of negotiating with tough suppliers and even tougher clients. "Never show your hand. Never let them see your tells." Chloe smiled, but it was a brittle thing that didn't reach her eyes. Her gaze kept darting from me to the window as if she were checking for witnesses. "Oh, I almost forgot the salad," she chirped, the excuse flimsy and poorly constructed. She stood and turned toward the big stainless steel refrigerator in the corner. And that's when I saw it. The cherry wood china cabinet I'd built for Diane 30 years ago hung on the opposite wall. Its glass doors now reflected the entire scene back at me like a silent movie. I saw Chloe's back then, I saw her hand. Quick as a snake's strike, it darted into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a small foil packet. Her slender fingers, the same fingers I used to hold when she was learning to walk, fumbled for a moment before tearing it open. A puff of fine white powder drifted down, dissolving instantly into the surface of the gumbo. A chill colder than any winter wind snaked up my spine. The world seemed to slow down. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall sounded like a hammer against an anvil. That wasn't sugar. It wasn't salt. It was a calculated act. A betrayal served up in her own mother's sanctuary. My heart was screaming, but my mind went ice cold. While Chloe fumbled in the refrigerator, pretending to look for a non-existent salad, I moved. The calloused hands of a retired contractor moved with deadly precision. I lifted my bowl, and then I lifted hers. A quick, silent exchange. Not a single drop was spilled, not a sound was made against the wooden tabletop. By the time I set them down in their new positions, they looked as if they had never been touched. Chloe returned holding a small plate of lettuce. Her smile was brighter now, perhaps from relief at having done the deed. "There we go," she said. "Enjoy your soup, Daddy." She sat down, picked up her spoon, and took a deep, hearty mouthful. I didn't move. I simply picked up my own silver spoon, part of our wedding set, and stirred the gumbo in front of me. I watched her. I watched the way she swallowed, the way the corner of her mouth twitched. "Why aren't you eating?" she asked after a few more spoonfuls. There was an edge to her voice, a hint of impatience. "It'll get cold." "I was just thinking about your mother," I said, and it wasn't a lie. "She would have been so proud to see you making her gumbo so well." I put a little extra emphasis on the words, "her gumbo." Chloe froze for a fraction of a second. A flicker of something I couldn't quite read passed through her eyes before she masked it. "Yes," she said, "I miss her too." I kept stirring. "I'm a builder. I know how to construct a house from the foundation up, and I know how to spot a rotten beam." The foundation of my own family, I realized, was crumbling to dust. The question wasn't what she had done. The question was why. And I would find out not by yelling, not by confronting, but by watching, waiting, and letting the trap she had set for me spring shut on her instead. I looked my daughter straight in the eyes. "Eat up, honey," I said softly. "Don't let it get cold." About 20 minutes later, just as Chloe was scraping the bottom of her bowl, the front door opened and Trevor walked in. My son-in-law. He had the kind of easy smile and firm handshake that made people trust him, but I'd long ago seen the flicker of something else in his eyes, a restless, hungry ambition. He breezed into the kitchen and kissed Chloe on the cheek. "Hey, babe." He nodded at me. "How are you feeling, Julius?" It was a casual question, but the way he looked at me was anything but. It was an assessment like a mechanic checking an old engine for signs of failure. Chloe was starting to look pale. A fine sheen of sweat had appeared on her forehead. "Just a little heartburn," she said, waving a dismissive hand. Trevor pulled up a chair, not bothering to get a plate for himself. His focus was entirely on me. "We were just talking about that investment opportunity down by the Beltline," he said, his voice smooth as butter. "You know, Julius, that property value is just going to keep skyrocketing. If you could just liquidate some assets, you could triple your money in a year." I just stared at him. I thought about Diane. Her heart attack had been sudden, the doctor said. One moment she was in her garden, the next she was gone. The $500,000 life insurance policy had been her final act of taking care of me. That money, along with this paid-off house in a neighborhood where tech kids were now paying $1 million for fixer-uppers, was my security. It was the nest egg Diane and I had built over a lifetime of hard work. And I realized Trevor and Chloe hadn't started being this attentive, this concerned about my finances until after that check had cleared. They saw this house not as a home filled with memories, but as a vault to be cracked open. Chloe pressed a hand to her stomach, a pained expression on her face. "I think that gumbo was a little too rich for me," she mumbled. She stood up unsteadily and headed for the bathroom down the hall. Trevor watched her go, and the look on his face wasn't one of husbandly concern. It was pure, unadulterated irritation. He looked at her like a tool that had just broken. I heard the sound of her being violently ill from the bathroom. Trevor's eyes met mine, and he forced a tight smile. "Women's stomachs, huh?" he said with a weak chuckle. "Always so sensitive." The mask was slipping. For the first time, I saw the raw desperation underneath. This wasn't just about greed. This was something else entirely. Something urgent. I decided to push it. I let out a soft groan and put a hand to my chest. "Phew," I said, my voice a little shaky. Feeling a little dizzy all of a sudden. I watched them closely. This was the test. A concerned daughter, a loving son-in-law, would be on their feet dialing 911. But Chloe and Trevor were perfectly still. They exchanged a look, a quick, cold communication that passed between them in an instant. There was no alarm in their eyes. There was only calculation. "You probably just need to rest, Dad," Chloe said, her voice strained. Trevor nodded eagerly. "Yeah, Julius, just a bit of indigestion. Why don't you go lie down for a while? We'll clean up here." They weren't trying to help me. They were trying to manage the situation. They wanted me in my room, quiet, out of the way, so they could figure out why their plan hadn't worked. Their lack of action was more damning than any confession. They left about an hour later after cleaning the kitchen with a chilling efficiency. I waited. I sat in my armchair in the living room, listening to the old clock tick away the seconds, each one a beat in a countdown I didn't yet understand. At 2 a.m, when the entire neighborhood was dark and silent, I went to work. I pulled on a pair of yellow rubber gloves from under the sink. I quietly took the trash can out to the back porch. I untied the knot Chloe had cinched so tightly and began to carefully sift through the day's garbage. Coffee grounds, eggshells, junk mail. My heart pounded against my ribs. What if I was wrong? What if I was just a paranoid old man? And then my gloved fingers touched it. At the very bottom, tucked inside an empty cereal box, I felt a small square of foil. I pulled it out. It was empty, but when I held it up to the porch light, I could see a faint dusting of white residue still clinging to the inside. I stood there in the cold night air, holding the proof in my hand. It wasn't paranoia. It was murder, and my own daughter was holding the knife. The game had changed. They thought I was a frail old man, a sheep ready for the slaughter. They were about to find out that even the oldest sheep can have the teeth of a wolf. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my armchair as the shadows in the living room shifted and stretched with the passing hours. When the first gray light of dawn filtered through the blinds, I didn't feel tired. I felt a sense of cold clarity I hadn't felt in years. I picked up my phone. I only had to dial one number. He picked up on the second ring. "Deacon, it's Julius. Get over here, and bring your clear head with you." I didn't need to say anything else. I hung up. An hour later, a dusty but reliable Ford F-150 pulled into my driveway. Deacon Jones stepped out. We're the same age, 72, but where I'm built like the brick houses I used to construct, Deacon is lean and wiry like a bundle of steel cables. He walked in without knocking, a privilege reserved for him alone. He took one look at my face, and his friendly demeanor vanished. "What is it, Jules?" He didn't waste time on pleasantries. We never did. I walked him to the kitchen table, and for the next 10 minutes I laid it all out. The soup, the reflection in the china cabinet, the switch, Chloe getting sick, Trevor's strange irritation, their fake concern when I pretended to feel dizzy. And finally I placed the small foil packet which I had sealed in a plastic bag on the center of the table. Deacon stared at it, then looked at me, his brow furrowed in disbelief. "Julius, are you absolutely sure? A man can imagine things, especially when he's grieving. Couldn't it have been some new kind of sweetener? A misunderstanding?" I met his gaze, and my voice was quiet but hard as granite. "Deacon, you and I were pinned down in a ditch in the Ashau Valley for 2 straight days with nothing but mud and fear to keep us company. I watched you then, and I know the look in a man's eyes when he's trying to decide if he should run or fight. I know what a liar looks like when he's trying to save his own skin. Trevor had that look yesterday, and Chloe, she had the look of a soldier following a bad order. The mention of the valley hung in the air between us, a ghost of a time we never spoke of but could never forget. It was our foundation, the bedrock of our 50-year friendship. We had seen the best and the absolute worst of human nature in that jungle." Deacon's skepticism melted away, replaced by something harder. He slowly reached out and picked up the plastic bag, holding the foil packet between his thumb and forefinger as if it were a venomous insect. He looked from the packet back to my face, and his eyes were filled with a cold, protective fury. "The little monsters," he said, his voice a low growl. "What are we going to do?" The "we" was all I needed to hear. It had always been we. From the jungles of Vietnam to building our businesses back home in Atlanta, we were brothers in all but blood. "I'm not going to the police," I said. "Not yet. This is my house. This is Diane's legacy. This isn't just a crime, Deacon. It's a desecration. We're not going to let them get away with it. We're going to dismantle them piece by piece." Deacon nodded slowly, a grim smile touching his lips. "All right then," he said. "It's time to go on the offensive. Where do we start?" I pointed to the plastic bag on the table. "We start there," I said. Deacon nodded, his mind already shifting from emotional support to strategic planning. It's a trait he honed as a young sergeant, an ability to cut through the fog of chaos and see the mission objectives. He got up from the table and began to pace the kitchen floor, his old boots making soft sounds on the linoleum that Diane had picked out. His first steps were to check the windows and the back door, his eyes scanning for angles and blind spots. "First things first," he said, stopping and pointing a finger at the bag. "We need to know exactly what this is. Not a guess, not a suspicion. We need a scientific fact, something we can hold in our hands, something that can stand up in a court of law if it comes to that. I know a guy who runs a private toxicology lab downtown. He's discreet. He doesn't ask questions as long as you pay in cash. It'll cost a pretty penny, but we'll have our answer in 48 hours. I just nodded. "Don't worry about the cost, Deacon. Diane and I didn't bust our backs for 40 years just to let a couple of greedy fools waltz in and steal it all. Do it." Good Deacon continued his pacing. "Second, you said you saw her in the reflection of the cabinet. That was a gift, Julius. Pure luck. We can't count on luck for what comes next. We need to control the battlefield. This room, your living room, may be the hallway. We need eyes and ears." He tapped his temple. "The most important evidence we're going to get is what they say to each other when they think you're not listening. That's where the truth lives. I can get some cameras, small ones, the kind that look like phone chargers or smoke detectors. They're wireless. They upload everything to a secure cloud server. We can watch it from my place on my computer. They'll never even know they're there." He stopped and looked at me, his expression deadly serious. "But you have to agree to this, Julius. It's a hell of a thing to bug your own house to spy on your own daughter. You have to be ready for what you might hear." I thought of Chloe's smile as she served me that soup. I thought of the coldness in Trevor's eyes. "I'm ready," I said, my voice low. "I need to know the whole truth, Deacon, no matter how ugly it is." "All right then," he said, slapping his hands together softly. "That's our plan of attack for now. Phase 1 is intelligence gathering. You'll take the sample to the lab. It's better if it's you. It's your sample. I'll handle the cameras. I can come by tomorrow morning when they think you're at your doctor's appointment. We'll get them set up. For now, you act normal. You are a grieving widower. You are a loving father. You are a slightly confused old man who had a dizzy spell. You play the part they expect you to play. You give them nothing. Understand. I understood perfectly. It was a role I was born to play. I was a builder. And now it was time to build the perfect trap. It felt just like the old days. Deacon said, a grim smile on his face. First we gather intel, then we set the ambush. We sat there in the quiet kitchen, the morning sun streaming in, making patterns on the floor. It wasn't the warm, comfortable silence I had shared with Diane. It was a new kind of silence. The silence of two old soldiers planning a war. The next morning I drove to a part of Atlanta I hadn't seen in years. It was a gritty industrial area south of the city filled with low brick warehouses and the constant rumble of semi-trucks. The address Deacon had given me was for a nondescript building with blacked-out windows and a single steel door. No signs, no company name. It looked more like a bookie's office than a place of science. I walked in and found myself in a small, sterile waiting room. A young woman behind a pane of thick glass looked up at me without a hint of curiosity. "I'm here to drop something off for analysis," I said, my voice sounding strange in the quiet room. She slid a metal tray under the glass. I placed the sealed plastic bag in it along with an envelope stuffed with cash. $500 in crisp $20 bills. As I pushed the tray back to her, my hand brushed against the cool metal, and for a moment I was back on a job site 40 years ago, sealing a deal with a handshake and a cash deposit. For most of my life, money was just a tool. It was a means to an end. It was the concrete for a foundation, the lumber for a frame, the paycheck that bought Diane a new dress or put Chloe through college. It was something you earned with sweat and skill. It was tangible, honest. Hayes Construction had been my life. I started it with nothing but a beat-up truck, a set of tools, and a belief that a man's word and his work were the only currency that truly mattered. I built houses, schools, and small community centers all over Georgia. I dealt with all kinds of people, from millionaire developers to single mothers trying to build their first home. And I learned that you could tell a lot about a person by how they handled their money. Some people saw it as a responsibility, a way to build a better future for their families. Others saw it as a weapon, a way to get power over other people. I never imagined my own daughter would fall into the second category. I never thought she would look at me, her own father, and see nothing but a walking bank account, an obstacle standing between her and a pile of cash. The woman behind the glass counted the money quickly, then pushed a small receipt toward me. It had no name on it, only a case number. "You can check the status online in 2 days," she said in a monotone voice. That was it. No questions asked. I walked out of that building and back into the bright Georgia sun, feeling like I had just made a deal with the devil. I had handed over a piece of my family's broken trust in exchange for a cold, hard fact. There was no turning back now. The truth was in a test tube, and in 48 hours it would have a name. While I was at the lab, Deacon went to work. I had called Chloe earlier that morning, telling her I had a cardiologist appointment, a little white lie to create a window of opportunity. She had sounded overly concerned on the phone, urging me to tell her exactly what the doctor said. I promised I would call her right after. The moment I pulled out of my driveway, I circled the block and parked where I could see my house. 5 minutes later, Deacon's truck rolled up. He didn't park in the driveway, but a block down the street. He got out carrying a simple black duffel bag and walked to my back door like he was just a neighbor coming to borrow a tool. He was inside for a little over an hour. It felt like an eternity. I sat in my car watching the hands on my dashboard clock slowly move. Every passing car made me jump, thinking it might be Chloe and Trevor deciding to do a surprise visit, but the street remained quiet. When Deacon finally emerged, he gave me a subtle nod as he walked back to his truck. I waited another 20 minutes before heading home myself. When I walked inside, everything looked exactly the same. There were no drill holes, no scuff marks, no signs of any work having been done. It was as if he had never been there. He called me an hour later. "It's done," he said, his voice all business. The living room is covered by the smoke detector above the fireplace. It has a 360-degree view. The kitchen is covered by the USB charger plugged into the outlet near the table. Both are voice-activated and record in high definition. The feed is live. I've sent you the login details to a secure app on your phone. Don't look at it when you're at home. Their phones could be tracking your Wi-Fi activity. Only check it when you're out. Later that day, I told Chloe I was going to the hardware store. I sat in my car in the parking lot, my hands trembling slightly as I opened the app Deacon had installed for me. Suddenly, my phone's screen showed my own kitchen. The image was perfectly clear. I could see the salt and pepper shakers on the table, the dish towel hanging over the oven door. It was surreal. My home, a place of memories and comfort, was now a surveillance site. A trap. I felt a pang of guilt watching the empty room. It felt like a violation, a betrayal of the very idea of family. But then I remembered the white powder falling into the soup. I remembered the cold, calculated look in their eyes. And the guilt vanished, replaced by a grim resolve. This was no longer just a house. It was a listening post. And I would sit and listen until I had every last one of their secrets. The hunt had officially begun. The 2 days that followed were a masterclass in deception. I moved through my own home like a ghost in a play, pretending to be a character I no longer was: a loving father, a trusting old man. Every phone call from Chloe was a performance. I would make my voice sound a little weaker, a little more tired than the day before. "Yes, honey, the doctor said my heart has some arrhythmia. No, it's nothing to worry about, just need to take it easy." She and Trevor came over both evenings, bringing dinner and smothering me with a cloying concern that made my skin crawl. They would ask about my health, about my finances, about whether I had thought any more about updating my will. I would answer their questions with vague, non-committal replies, all the while watching them through the invisible eyes of the cameras. I would watch them on my phone later, sitting in my car in a deserted parking lot. I saw the way they would smile at me and then exchange cold, frustrated glances with each other when my back was turned. I heard their whispered arguments in my kitchen after they thought I had gone to bed. "It's not working." Trevor would hiss, his voice a venomous whisper. "He's still fine. We're running out of time. Be patient." Chloe would reply, her voice tight with anxiety. "It's supposed to be gradual, remember. We can't rush it." Each word was a nail being hammered into the coffin of the love I once had for my daughter. I felt a profound sadness, a grief that was sharper and more painful than when Diane had died. That was a loss to nature. This was a loss to evil. On the third morning, a simple text message arrived on my phone. It was from Deacon. It just said, "Results." My heart began to pound. I called Chloe and told her I was feeling tired and was going to spend the day resting. Then I got in my car and drove to Deacon's house. He was waiting for me in his small workshop behind his house, a place that smelled of sawdust and old motor oil. He had his laptop open on his workbench. He didn't say hello. He just pointed to the screen. "There's an email. It came in 10 minutes ago." He hadn't opened it. He had waited for me. "We're in this together," he said, his voice steady. "We see it together." I pulled up a stool and sat beside him. My hand was shaking as I moved the mouse and clicked on the email. It contained a single attachment, a PDF file with the lab's logo at the top. I clicked it open. The report was filled with chemical terms and technical jargon that meant nothing to me. But I didn't need to understand the science. I only needed to read the summary at the bottom. It read, "The submitted substance was identified as a concentrated crystalline form of metoprolol, a potent beta blocker. In repeated high doses administered orally, this substance can induce severe bradycardia, leading to progressive heart failure and eventual cardiac arrest. The symptoms would be virtually indistinguishable from a naturally occurring coronary event in an elderly subject with a pre-existing heart condition." Deacon read the last sentence aloud, his voice barely a whisper. "A naturally occurring coronary event." I stared at the screen, the words blurring together. It was a death sentence written in the cold, dispassionate language of science. They had planned to kill me slowly, day by day, making it look like my own body was betraying me. It was the perfect murder. No weapon, no witnesses, just a daughter's cooking and a grieving family. Deacon reached over and closed the laptop with a quiet snap. The workshop was silent except for the buzzing of a fly near the window. All my doubts, all my hopes that I was somehow wrong, that this was all a terrible misunderstanding, evaporated in that moment. What I was left with was a certainty that was as hard and as cold as a tombstone. There was no going back now. The man who had entered this workshop that morning, a father hoping for the best, was gone. In his place sat a man who now understood he was at war. And in war, the only rule is to survive. That night, Deacon and I sat in his workshop, the glow of the laptop screen casting long shadows on the walls around us. We had spent the day in a state of suspended animation, waiting for Chloe and Trevor to return to my house. They had come over in the evening, their faces a perfect mask of concern. They brought me a bland chicken broth, which I politely accepted and then threw down the sink the moment they left. Now the show was about to begin. Deacon clicked the play button on the most recent recording from the kitchen camera. For a few minutes, there was nothing but the ambient sounds of the house, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock. Then Chloe and Trevor walked into the frame. Chloe immediately went to the sink and started washing the bowl I had used for the broth. Trevor began pacing the floor, his body language crackling with a nervous energy that was visible even on the small screen. "It's not working," he said, his voice a low, frustrated growl. "The old man is still puttering around like nothing's wrong. Did you even use enough?" "Of course I did," Chloe snapped back, her voice sharp with defensiveness. "I used exactly what you told me to. Maybe it just takes time." Trevor laughed, a short, ugly sound devoid of any humor. "Time, Chloe? We don't have time. Do you have any idea the kind of people I'm dealing with? These aren't credit card companies that send you a nasty letter in the mail. These guys send people to your door with baseball bats." "What are you talking about?" Chloe asked, turning away from the sink, her face a mixture of confusion and fear. Trevor stopped pacing and ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He looked like a cornered animal. "The investment opportunity," he said, his voice dropping. "It wasn't an investment. It was a bet, a series of bets. I thought I had a sure thing, Chloe, a system. But I lost. I lost big." "How big?" Chloe whispered, her voice trembling. "Big enough that they gave me 30 days to pay it back, or they're going to start breaking things, starting with my legs and ending with you." Chloe staggered back as if she'd been struck, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God, Trevor, how could you? How much is it? $200,000, he said, the number dropping into the quiet kitchen like a bomb. Chloe collapsed into a chair at the table, her face as white as a sheet. "We don't have that kind of money," she sobbed. "My savings are gone. Your business is failing. We have nothing." "I know we don't have it," Trevor said, his voice now dangerously calm. "But your father does, or at least his house does. That's why I had to do it." "Do what?" Chloe asked, looking up at him, her eyes wide with dread. "I needed a down payment to secure the loan," Trevor explained. "So I took out a hard money loan, a bridge loan. I told them I was handling your father's estate, but they needed his signature, and he wouldn't give it. So I gave it to them." You forged his signature," Chloe stammered in disbelief. "You committed a crime." Trevor knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. His face was a mask of desperate sincerity. "It was the only way, babe. I was protecting you, protecting us. All we have to do is pay it back before the 30 days are up. And the only way to do that is to get access to the equity in this house. The only way to do that is if he's gone." The ugly word hung in the air between them. Chloe started to cry harder, pulling her hands away from his. "This is insane. This is a nightmare. I can't do this, Trevor. I can't kill my own father. It wasn't supposed to be like this." "Listen to me," Trevor said, his voice hardening again. "We are past the point of can't. We are in this now together. You're an accomplice. You put the powder in his soup. We just have to see it through. We'll give it another week. If nothing happens, then we move to Plan B." "What's Plan B?" Chloe whispered. "You don't want to know," he said, standing up. "Just pray that we don't have to use it." Deacon reached out and closed the laptop. The sudden darkness in the workshop was a relief. We sat there in the silence, the terrible words of the recording still echoing in our ears. I had thought I was dealing with simple greed, but this was something far darker. This was a web of lies, deceit, and desperation that had grown into a monster. And that monster was now living in my house, trying to devour me. I looked at Deacon, and he looked at me. The sadness in my heart had now completely burned away, leaving behind something cold, hard, and unbreakable. This wasn't just about saving my own life anymore. This was about saving the home that I had built with my wife, brick by brick. It was about protecting the legacy of a good woman from the filth of her own daughter's choices. The game had just escalated, and I knew with a chilling certainty that I would have to be willing to destroy my own daughter to win it. Deacon knew a lawyer. He didn't describe her as friendly or compassionate. The only word he used was effective. Her name was Imani Carter, and her office was on the 30th floor of a gleaming glass and steel skyscraper in Midtown Atlanta. The view from her waiting room looked out over the entire city, a panorama of power and ambition. The room itself was a study in minimalist elegance, cool gray tones, polished chrome, and a single stunning piece of modern art on the wall. It was a space designed to communicate success and to intimidate. When a woman opened the door and called my name, I was expecting someone older. Ms. Imani Carter was a sharp, intelligent-looking black woman who couldn't have been much older than 40. She was dressed in a perfectly tailored dark blue suit, and her hair was cut in a severe yet stylish bob. She didn't smile. She just looked at me with a pair of eyes that were as bright and as hard as obsidian. "Mr. Hayes." "Please come in," she said, her voice as crisp and cool as the decor. Her office was even more impressive. One entire wall was a floor-to-ceiling window offering a breathtaking view of the city below. Her desk was a large slab of black marble, completely clear except for a laptop and a single file folder. She didn't ask if I wanted coffee or water. She simply sat down behind her desk, gestured to the chair opposite her, and said, "Deacon Jones tells me you have a serious family matter." I sat down feeling for the first time like a 72-year-old man in a world that didn't belong to him. But then I looked at the file folder on her desk, and I remembered why I was here. I took a deep breath, and the feeling of intimidation was replaced by the cold, hard weight of my purpose. "Ms. Carter," I began, my voice steady. "I'm here because my daughter and my son-in-law are trying to murder me." I said the words plainly, without emotion. I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, not shock, but a sharpening of her focus. She leaned forward slightly, her hands clasped on the desk. "Go on," she said. For the next 20 minutes, I laid out the entire story. I was methodical and I was precise. I was a builder presenting a case for a new construction project. I started with the foundation, the incident with the soup. I moved on to the supporting structures, my suspicions, the strange behavior of Chloe and Trevor. Then I presented the physical evidence. I slid a folder across the polished desk. In it was a copy of the lab report. She read it slowly, her expression unreadable. Her eyes scanned the technical jargon and the final summary. When she finished, she looked up at me. "This is compelling," she said, her voice neutral, "but it's circumstantial. Your daughter could claim she was adding a health supplement, that the dosage was an accident. They could paint you as a confused old man. I expected this." That's when I presented the final piece of my case. I took a small USB drive from my pocket and placed it on the desk next to the folder. My wife, Diane. God rest her soul. She used to handle all our paperwork and our finances, I said, my voice softening for the first time. She always told me, "Julius, you have to read the fine print. You have to listen to what people say when they think no one is listening." I never really understood what she meant until now. On this drive is an audio recording from my kitchen 2 nights ago. In it, my son-in-law Trevor confesses to being $200,000 in debt to dangerous people. He confesses to forging my signature on a loan document using my house as collateral. And they both discuss their plan to expedite my death so they can pay that debt. Ms. Carter's mask of professional detachment finally cracked. For the first time, I saw a flash of raw emotion in her eyes, a look of cold, predatory interest. She picked up the USB drive. "You did well to record this, Mr. Hayes," she said. "Very well." She stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city below. "They've done more than just plan to harm you. They've committed fraud. That gives us leverage. People like your son-in-law. They're arrogant. They believe they're the smartest people in the room. They build their lives on a foundation of lies, and they think the walls will never come down." She turned to face me. "Our job," she said, a hint of a grim smile on her lips, "is to be the wrecking ball. This is not going to be a simple legal defense, Mr. Hayes. We are not going to wait for them to make another move. We are going to launch a preemptive strike. We will attack them on the financial front and on the legal front. We will dismantle their lives so thoroughly that by the time we are done, they will have nothing left." I looked at this sharp, brilliant, and ruthless woman, and I knew Deacon was right. She was exactly what I needed. She wasn't just a lawyer. She was a weapon, and I was ready to aim her and pull the trigger. She walked back to her desk and sat down, her movements precise and economical. She looked at me, not with sympathy, but with the focused intensity of a chess master studying the board. "Mr. Hayes," she began, her voice cutting through the quiet of the office. "A conventional approach here would be to go to the police. We would file a report. They would investigate. It would be slow, messy, and given your relationship to the perpetrator, the outcome would be uncertain. They would portray you as a vindictive old man. It would become a family drama played out for the public. We are not going to do that. We are not going to play defense. We are going to launch a three-pronged attack designed to utterly neutralize them before they even realize they are under fire." She held up one finger. "The first front is psychological. Right now, they think they are in control. They believe you are weak and unaware. We are going to feed that belief. Starting tomorrow, you are going to get sick. Not really, of course. But you will begin to show symptoms. You will be tired. You will mention dizzy spells. We have a trusted doctor on retainer who will be happy to diagnose you with a severe arrhythmia. You are going to become the frail old man they want you to be. You will let your daughter take care of you. You will become dependent on her. This is the bait. It will make them feel confident and secure. And confident people, Mr. Hayes, get very, very sloppy." She held up a second finger. "While they are busy playing nursemaid to a man they are actively trying to kill, we will launch the second attack, the financial one. This is where we cut the head off the snake. Using a power of attorney which you will grant me today, I will take 3 immediate actions. First, I will freeze every single joint bank account you share with your daughter. The flow of money stops today. Second, I will contact the hard money lender your son-in-law defrauded. We will not threaten to sue. We will simply present them with indisputable evidence that the signature on their loan document is a forgery. These types of lenders are not known for their patience or their pleasantries. They will unleash their own collections process on him, a process far more terrifying than a letter from a lawyer. He will find himself in a world of trouble that has nothing to do with us. And third," she said, leaning forward, her eyes glinting, "we will take the prize off the table completely. We will immediately transfer the deed to your house into an irrevocable trust in your name with a trustee of your choosing. To put it simply, Mr. Hayes, we are making your house legally untouchable. They can't inherit it. They can't force you to sell it. They can't touch it. It will no longer be a part of the equation. They will be trying to kill you for an asset that they can never possess." She held up a third finger. "The final front is the checkmate. Once their financial world is in chaos, once Trevor is being pursued by his creditors, once they are backed into a corner and desperate, that is when you will call for one final family meeting. You will tell them you want to finalize your will and sign over power of attorney. They will come to your house expecting to be handed the keys to the kingdom. I will be there waiting for them, and we will present them with a choice. Option A, they sign a legally binding document relinquishing any and all claim to your estate, present and future, and they walk away with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Or option B, I personally deliver our entire file, the lab report, the audio recordings, the evidence of fraud to the district attorney's office. And I will make an anonymous call to the loan sharks your son-in-law is so afraid of and let them know exactly where he is and that he has no way of ever paying them back." She leaned back in her chair. "It will be their choice, Mr. Hayes. A quiet life of poverty or a complete and utter annihilation." I sat there stunned. The sheer audacity and ruthlessness of the plan took my breath away. It was a strategy of total war. It wasn't just about stopping them. It was about erasing them. I looked at this brilliant woman, and I saw not just a lawyer, but a general. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a flicker of something I thought I had lost forever. I felt the hope of victory. "Let's begin," I said, my voice clear and strong. The following morning I woke up, and for the first time in my life I had to teach myself how to be weak. It went against every instinct in my body. I was a man who had hauled, lumber-climbed scaffolding and commanded work crews. Now I had to become a fragile old man on the verge of collapse. It was the most important role I would ever play. I started by skipping my morning coffee. I let myself feel the dull headache of caffeine withdrawal. I walked around the house, slowly, deliberately, putting a slight shuffle in my step. Then, around 10 o'clock, I picked up the phone to call Chloe. I took a few shallow breaths before I dialed, making my voice sound airy and strained. She answered on the second ring. "Daddy," she said, her voice bright. "I was just about to call you." I let out a soft groan before speaking. "Chloe." "Honey, I said, my voice a weak imitation of its usual self. I had a very bad night. I didn't sleep well. The line was silent for a moment, then her voice came back, laced with a sudden, eager concern. "Oh no, what's wrong? You sound terrible. I just feel so weak," I said, letting my voice trail off. "And my heart, it's been doing this funny, fluttering thing all morning." I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. "Daddy, you need to see a doctor right away," she said, her voice firm. "You can't ignore something like that. I'm coming over." No, I said, feigning reluctance. "I don't want to be a bother." I already made an appointment. Dr. Evans recommended a specialist, a Dr. Alistair Finch. I'm heading there now. This was a crucial part of Ms. Carter's plan. Dr. Finch was a semi-retired cardiologist, a friend of her father's who owed her a favor. He was our ace in the hole. The doctor's office was calm and professional. Dr. Finch, a kind-looking man with graying hair and a gentle demeanor, put me through a series of tests. I lay on the examination table, the cold gel of the ultrasound probe spreading across my chest, the rhythmic beeping of the EKG machine filling the room. It all felt so real that for a moment I almost believed I was sick. After the tests, Dr. Finch had me sit in his office. He pulled his chair close to mine and looked at me with a grave expression. "Julius," he said, his voice full of professional sympathy, "the tests show a significant cardiac arrhythmia. Your heart is not beating correctly. It's a serious condition and we need to monitor it very closely. I want you to avoid all forms of stress. You need to be resting, and you should not be alone." I nodded, pretending to absorb the heavy news. I left his office with a handful of prescriptions for placebo pills and a diagnosis that was worth more than gold. As soon as I was in my car, I called Chloe. My voice was trembling this time, the performance fueled by a cold fury. "Honey," I said, my voice cracking, I just left the doctor's. It's my heart. It's not good. He said it's a severe arrhythmia. He said I need to be monitored." The fake sympathy that poured through the phone was almost suffocating. "Oh, my poor daddy. Don't you worry about a thing. Trevor and I will be right there. We'll take care of everything. You won't have to lift a finger." I hung up the phone and stared out at the Atlanta traffic. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Now I just had to lie still and wait for the predators to walk into the cage. It was time to see just how far they were willing to go. They descended upon my house like a pair of well-dressed vultures. Chloe arrived first, armed with grocery bags full of healthy foods I would never eat and a face full of theatrical worry. Trevor followed shortly after, carrying a briefcase and wearing a somber suit as if he were already attending my funeral. They immediately took over. My quiet home was filled with their bustling energy, their hushed whispers, and their suffocating attention. Chloe insisted on making me chamomile tea and a tasteless vegetable broth. She would sit by my chair, feeling my forehead for a fever, fluffing my pillows and speaking to me in the slow, patronizing tone one uses for a small child. "Oh, Daddy, you look so pale," she would say, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "You just need to rest. Let us take care of everything." Trevor, meanwhile, appointed himself the manager of my affairs. He would sit at my kitchen table with piles of my mail, sorting through bills and bank statements. "Don't you worry about any of this, Julius," he would say with a reassuring pat on my shoulder. "The stress isn't good for your heart. I'll make sure everything is paid on time. You just focus on getting better." They were a perfect team, a well-oiled machine of deceit. And all the while they performed this elaborate play of a loving family. The tiny hidden lenses of the cameras recorded their every move. The smoke detector in the living room, the USB charger in the kitchen, they were the silent, unbiased witnesses to this grotesque performance. I watched them and played my part. I was the frail, grateful father. I would thank Chloe for the terrible soup. I would nod weakly as Trevor explained how he was reorganizing my financial files. I would sigh and tell them how blessed I was to have them, that I didn't know what I would do without them. And with every word of praise I offered, I could see their confidence swell. They thought they had me. They believed their plan was working perfectly. Their smiles became a little more genuine, their touches a little less forced. They were getting comfortable in their roles as my future heirs. The worst part was listening to them when they thought I was asleep. I would be in my armchair pretending to doze off, and I would hear them whispering in the kitchen. The camera's microphone picked up everything. "He seems weaker today," Chloe would say, a hopeful note in her voice. Dr. Finch was right. It's progressing. Good. Trevor would reply, his voice low and urgent. "We need to start talking about getting power of attorney. We need to be able to make decisions for him when he can't. We'll bring it up tomorrow. We'll say it's to protect him from stress. He'll agree. He trusts us." Hearing those words while pretending to be asleep was a form of torture I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. I had to control my breathing, keep my expression placid, while every muscle in my body wanted to leap up and scream. But I held my ground. I was the bait in my own trap, and the bait must remain perfectly still. They were circling closer and closer, their greed making them blind to the steel jaws that were about to snap shut around them. I was not just fighting for my life anymore. I was fighting for the truth, and I would let them bury me in their fake kindness until the moment was right to rise from the grave they had dug for me and pull them down into it. While I was playing the part of the helpless invalid in my living room, a storm of a different kind was gathering. My body was still, but my mind was in a high-rise office 30 floors above the city with Ms. Amani Carter. As Chloe would adjust the blanket on my lap for the 10th time in an hour, her touch a grotesque parody of affection, I would picture Ms. Carter on the phone, her voice a blade of cold, polished steel. I knew what she was doing. I had signed the power of attorney document in her office the day before, my hand steady and firm. It was the key that unlocked her entire arsenal. The first shot was fired at 10 a.m., while Trevor was in my kitchen loudly explaining to Chloe how he was going to consolidate my messy financial accounts. For me, I imagined Ms. Carter speaking to the manager of my bank. It was the bank I had used for 50 years. The joint account I shared with Chloe was supposed to be for emergencies, a safety net for my daughter. Now it had become a weapon pointed at my head. Ms. Carter would have been polite but immovable, citing the legal authority of the document I had signed. And just like that, with a few keystrokes on a computer, the safety net was gone. Chloe's access was severed. The flow of money from my life to hers was cut off as cleanly as a surgeon's incision. The second shot was fired just after lunch. While Chloe was reading a magazine aloud to me, her voice a monotonous drone, Trevor was on the phone in the other room arguing with someone about a late payment. He didn't know it yet, but his troubles were just beginning. I pictured Ms. Carter drafting a letter. It wouldn't be an angry letter. It would be cold, factual, and terrifying. It would be addressed to the legal department of the hard money lender. It would state simply that the loan issued to Mr. Trevor Grant against the property of Julius Hayes was secured with a fraudulent signature. Attached would be the sworn affidavit from a handwriting expert and a copy of my driver's license signature from the DMV. She wouldn't threaten to sue them. She didn't have to. She was simply handing them a lit stick of dynamite and letting them throw it. The company's own brutal collection machine would now turn on Trevor with a vengeance. The wolves he had invited to my door would now be clawing at his own. The final move, the checkmate, was the most elegant and the most profound. It happened while I was pretending to nap in my armchair. I visualized Ms. Carter in a quiet conference room with a paralegal poring over property deeds and legal filings. She was performing a kind of legal magic. She was taking my home, the house I had built with my own hands, the place where I had raised my daughter and loved my wife, and she was lifting it out of my name. She was placing it into a fortress, a legal entity called the Diane Hayes Irrevocable Trust. It was no longer just a house. It was a monument to my wife's memory. And with the stroke of a pen, it became legally untouchable. It could not be willed away. It could not be taken by creditors. It could not be signed over by a confused old man. It was safe. Forever. As I sat there feigning sleep, listening to the sound of my daughter and her husband plotting my demise in my own kitchen, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. They were living in a house that was no longer mine to give. They were trying to steal from a bank account that was already empty. They were fighting a war they had already lost. The walls of the trap were invisible, but they were closing in with every passing minute. They just couldn't see them yet. After a week of my award-winning performance as a dying man, it was time for the final act. I had spent the past few days becoming progressively weaker. I needed help getting out of my chair. I would occasionally forget what I was saying mid-sentence. I was the perfect picture of a man fading away. The financial noose had been tightening around Trevor for days. I had overheard frantic whispered phone calls where his voice was high and strained. He was being hounded by his creditors. Chloe's credit card had been declined at the grocery store, sending her into a panicked rage. They were desperate. The time was ripe. I called them into the living room where I was bundled up in a blanket on my favorite armchair. My voice was a frail whisper. "Chloe, Trevor," I said, taking a shaky breath. I've been doing a lot of thinking. With my health like this, I think it's time we get my affairs in order. I need to finalize my will, and I think it would be best if I signed over power of attorney to you two, so you can handle things for me." The change in the room's atmosphere was immediate. It was like the sun had broken through the clouds. The strained expressions on their faces were replaced by looks of pure, undisguised triumph. They exchanged a quick glance, a look so full of greed it was almost obscene. "Of course," Daddy Chloe said, rushing to my side and taking my hand. "Whatever you think is best. We're here for you." They arrived the next afternoon at precisely 3 o'clock. They walked in not with the somber air of a family dealing with an illness, but with the barely concealed excitement of lottery winners coming to claim their prize. Trevor was wearing a crisp new suit, and Chloe had her hair done. They looked like they were heading to a celebration, not a somber legal meeting. They carried a fancy leather briefcase which I knew contained the documents they had prepared themselves ready for my signature. They found me in the living room sitting in my armchair, but I wasn't bundled in a blanket. I was wearing a freshly pressed shirt, and I was sitting up straight. Deacon was there, standing quietly by the fireplace. "What's he doing here?" Trevor asked, his voice laced with suspicion. "He's here as a witness." "Deacon?" I said, my voice clear and steady for the first time in a week. They both stared at me, a flicker of confusion in their eyes. The frail old man was gone. Before they could process this change, the doorbell rang. Deacon moved to the door and opened it. A woman stepped inside. It was Ms. Imani Carter. She was dressed in a sharp black suit and carried a slim leather briefcase of her own. She walked into the living room with the silent, confident stride of a panther entering a cage. She surveyed the scene, her intelligent eyes moving from Trevor's stunned face to Chloe's confused one. The triumphant smiles on their faces evaporated instantly, replaced by a sudden mask of bewildered panic. "Who are you?" Chloe stammered, looking from Ms. Carter to me. "This is my attorney, Ms. Imani Carter," I said, my voice ringing with an authority they hadn't heard in a very long time. "I believe she has a few things to discuss with you before we sign any papers." The air in the room grew thick and heavy. The trap had just sprung. And for the first time, Chloe and Trevor looked at me and saw not a frail old man, not a victim, but the man who had built this very house with his own 2 hands. And they finally realized they were no longer the hunters. They were the prey. Trevor was the first to recover his composure. He puffed out his chest and took a half step forward, a weak attempt to reclaim control of the room. "Look, I don't know who you are," he said, trying to sound intimidating. "But this is a private family matter, so I suggest you leave." Ms. Carter didn't even glance at him. She walked calmly to the large coffee table that sat in the middle of the room. She placed her briefcase on it and opened it with 2 quiet clicks. "It became a family matter, Trevor," she said, her voice dangerously soft, "when you decided to forge my client's signature. It became a family matter, Chloe, when you decided to poison his soup." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a document, placing it squarely on the table. "Exhibit A," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. "A certified lab report from Atlantic Toxicology. It positively identifies the substance found in your trash can, Chloe, as a concentrated dosage of metoprolol, a beta blocker, capable of inducing cardiac arrest in a man of your father's age and health condition." Chloe let out a small, choked sound, her face turning ashen. Trevor stared at the document, his mouth hanging slightly open. Ms. Carter placed a second document on the table. "Exhibit B, a copy of a $200,000 loan agreement from a high-risk lender. An agreement secured by this house and bearing a signature that a forensic expert has confirmed is a forgery." Trevor's face went from pale to ghostly white. Ms. Carter's hand went into her briefcase one last time. "Exhibit C, bank statements and online betting slips detailing over $300,000 in gambling losses under your name, Trevor. Proof of the motive for your desperation." They were both speechless, just staring at the pile of paper that represented the complete destruction of their lives. But Ms. Carter wasn't finished. She gave a slight nod to Deacon. "Deacon," she said simply, "if you would." Deacon raised a small remote and pressed a button. The large television screen mounted above the fireplace flickered to life. The image was sharp and clear. It was my kitchen, and on the screen they saw themselves. They watched in silent horror as the video played the scene of Chloe secretly pouring the white powder into my soup. Then the video cut to a few nights later. They watch themselves arguing in the same kitchen, their voices filling the quiet living room clear as a bell. We hear Trevor's panicked voice saying, "We're running out of time." We hear him confessing to the massive debt to the loan sharks. We hear him admit to forging my signature, and we hear them both discussing the plan to kill me. Chloe stared at the screen, her own face a mask of guilt, her own words a damning confession. Trevor's arrogant facade had completely disintegrated. He looked back and forth from the television screen to my face, his eyes wide with the pure terror of a man who knows the game is over and he has lost everything. The video ended. The screen went black, but their recorded voices still seemed to echo in the crushing silence of the room. Trevor finally broke the silence. His denial came out as a desperate, high-pitched scream. It was her idea. She's the one who's crazy. I was just trying to manage the situation to protect him. He pointed a trembling finger at Chloe, who was now sobbing uncontrollably on the floor. He opened his mouth to shout again, but the words were cut short by the sound of the front door opening. It didn't creak open. It was pushed open with a firm, confident force that made us all turn. Two men stepped inside. They were not police officers. They were both large and powerfully built, dressed in expensive tracksuits that did little to hide their muscular frames. They looked completely out of place in Diane's carefully decorated living room. They moved with a quiet, unnerving calm, their eyes scanning the room before they settled on Trevor. The change in my son-in-law was instantaneous. The frantic anger vanished, replaced by a wave of pure primal terror. The color drained from his face, leaving it a sickly gray. He took an involuntary step backward, bumping into a side table and rattling a lamp. He knew exactly who these men were. The room was frozen in a moment of shocked silence. Then Ms. Carter spoke, her voice as calm and unbothered as if she were commenting on the weather. "Trevor, it seems your business partners have arrived to discuss your outstanding debt. When you commit fraud using dangerous people's money, they tend to take a very personal interest in your financial future. I thought it was only fair to let them know that you were here today. I also let them know that the asset you promised them, my client's house, was never actually on the table. It was a lie built on a forgery. I imagine they are quite eager to discuss alternative forms of payment." The two men started to walk toward Trevor, their movements deliberate and unhurried. Trevor started begging, his voice cracking. "No, please. I can get the money. I swear. Just give me one more week. I just need one more week." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Julius, tell them. Tell them I'm good for it." I just looked at him, my face a mask of stone. I said nothing. The men reached him. They didn't punch him. They didn't shout. One of them simply took his left arm and the other took his right, their grips like iron vices. They turned and began to drag him toward the open door. His protests turned into pathetic whimpers of terror as they pulled him out of the house and into the afternoon sun. The front door clicked shut behind them, leaving a sudden, shocking silence in its wake. Trevor was gone. Justice hadn't come from a judge or a jury. It had come from the world of violence and desperation that he had chosen to embrace. And it was swift, and it was brutal. Chloe signed the papers. Her hand shook so badly she could barely hold the pen. She took the bus ticket and the envelope with the $1,000 inside. She didn't look at me. She just walked out the front door and out of my life. I have not heard from her since. A few months have passed. Deacon and I are sitting on my back porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. We don't say much. We don't have to. The quiet between us is comfortable again. Inside, I can hear the happy chatter of my granddaughter Maya. Gaining custody of her is a slow process, but for now she is here, she is safe, and she is loved. Later, I am in the kitchen standing over the stove. Maya is on a stool beside me, carefully stirring the pot. I am teaching her how to make her grandmother's gumbo the right way. The air is filled not with the silence of betrayal, but with the scent of spices and the sound of a child's laughter. My victory didn't feel like a victory at first. It felt like a funeral for the daughter I thought I had. But now, standing here with this little girl, my true legacy, I know that I didn't destroy my family. I saved what was left of it. And this hard-won peace is the most precious thing I have ever built. This whole ordeal taught me a painful but powerful lesson. For years, I believed that being a father simply meant providing for your family. I learned that true strength isn't just about giving, it's about protecting what you and your loved ones have built. Sometimes the greatest betrayals come from those closest to you, and you must never underestimate the quiet resolve of a person who has everything left to lose. I discovered that true family is not defined by blood, but by respect, loyalty, and love. And you have a right to defend that family, even if it means protecting it from your own. Let me know in the comments if you believe that protecting your peace sometimes requires making the hardest decisions.